If these were your actors, and these were your films, then you could only be Hollywood's most commercially successful filmmaker.
A great idea for a movie is still the rarest commodity.
The South Bank Show takes you inside the creative mind of blockbuster director Robert Zemeckis, coming up next, only on Bravo. Fascinating, intriguing, always compelling. Profiles of the greatest names of the past and present. It's an all-new season of the Ace Award-winning South Bank Show, coming up next, only on Bravo.
Hello. If making money in movies is success in movies, then Robert Zemeckis is currently the most successful director in the world. His films, including the Back to the Future series and Who Framed Roger Rabbit, have earned over $1 billion at the box office. He's targeted the kids and hit the jackpot, reminding us that Hollywood is still the USA's second biggest manufacturing base. His latest film, Death Becomes Her, opens in Britain next month. It's a black comedy starring Goldie Hawn, Bruce Willis and Meryl Streep. Streep plays a fading actress, and we begin with her performing in a musical version of Sweet Bird of Youth.
Virgin temptress, dream of others, yes, it's me, yes, it's me.
We see you,
You mean me?
idle goddess, shameless hussy, diva.
The idea was that it wasn't a very good number, but one of the hardest things to do is to do something that is just a little bit bad. It would be easy to do it ridiculously bad, but we wanted Madeline and her character to be singing and dancing her heart out, and so we sort of went back and looked at a lot of variety shows from the 60s and 70s and kind of put a mix of what we consider some of the worst Broadway and Vegas type steps and things in there. It does reflect the Madeline character. Flashy, and that's of course what dazzles Bruce.
She's sensational.
We wanted then the choreography to help move the camera back and forth and widen it out and things like that, so we kept the frame alive. And the other thing that makes the number a bit off, you know, puts it a bit off for the audience is that all the dancers are just dancing their heart out. And some audiences we've shown the film to aren't really sure if this is a bad number or if it's just bad cinema. But most of them seem to get it.
Your generation,
That's me.
You know, I think like every other kid who grew up in the era of the Beatles, I, played the guitar and had a band in my garage and basement and that sort of thing. So I had these dreams of being a rock star for a while. And television, I watched a lot of television. And I started fooling around with making movies with, my friends and my relatives and everyone in it. And then that just became more and more elaborate and trying to sync up sound with it, and then on to doing some things with puppet animation and that sort of thing.
Boy, today really shaped up and hurried, didn't it? Did you ever notice how
I got really interested in films mainly from enjoying special effects. trying to figure out how they did certain things.
Just suddenly changes. That was totally uncalled for.
He likes to cram a lot of information into the frame. There's always something happening everywhere in his frames. He's got a lot of colors. It's just a lot of energy in each one of his shots, but not to the extent where he's sacrificing telling the story.
He likes to tell stories, and he likes movies that work. And that's a really old-fashioned Hollywood way of looking at material. If you read interviews with Howard Hawks and people, or John Ford, they're really reluctant to tell you how important what they were doing was, but they actually will tell you how they got a shot. And Zemeckis is the same. Is in that very much in that tradition. I mean, I personally find it kind of refreshing.
The Lift was a film that I did in film school. You had to make a film in black and white with no sync sound, 16 millimeter, no sync sound, and it can only be 8 minutes or shorter. And this frustrated a lot of film students because they wanted it to be sync sound, they wanted it to be longer. But I loved having those limitations, so I made a film, designed a story about a guy who is terrorized by this elevator in this Gothic apartment building. And it's just two characters. It's him in the elevator, and every time he tries to get to the elevator, it moves to another floor, and finally it kills him. What I like about the film is that it was pure cinema. And what it taught me more than anything was learning the form that you're working in and trying to, work from the inside of that form out. So writing something that accommodates the form rather than doing a half-baked idea. And that's why I'm involved in this TV show, Tales from the Crypt, because that's a chance to do the short film. I really enjoy working in that form.
Something needs to be done about that fire. Have you got the poker?
Yes.
Well, let me have it.
What did you say?
What are you, deaf? I said let me have it.
Merry Christmas, you son of a bitch.
Bob has a real sort of dark side to him, and he loves this kind of macabre kind of story.
Mommy?
Carrie.
Tales from the Crypt. I mean, you see this side of Bob that people go, ooh, where'd that come from? Well, Bob has this curiosity for this dark side, for the black comedy, black humor side of things.
I told you Santa would come, and he didn't even have to come down the chimney. I let him in. No! No!
Naughty or nice?
He's got this real fantasy, sort of very childlike, boyish side to him, and he's got this hard side, this edge, and you put them together, you get Death Becomes It.
The fun thing about film is that you have a chance to manipulate time, especially in action. In the stairfall and in the strangling scene, of course, we wanted it to be a bit almost cartoony in how, she defies gravity by teetering on the edge of these stairs, which does a couple of things. It takes a bit of the reality off of the murder and then allows the audience, I hope, to tolerate this endless stairfall, which was done in a cartoon sense by filmically expanding the stairs to about 5 times their length. In the screenplay, the writer wrote, when she falls on the stairs, she hits every single stair. And that was a wonderful visual description of how the scene had to unfold. And the sound helps us feel every stair that she hits.
Oh, boy.
What a director looks for in a screenplay is things that can trigger images in his head. That, I think, is the key to writing action, because you can't really be too specific because it's always going to change. But if you can just inspire images in the director in the way that you describe action, that to me is very good writing.
I met Bob Zemeckis at USC Film School in 1971 or 72, 71 I think it was. We were undergraduates in a largely graduate department, and therefore we had a common bond automatically because the department was about 70 or 80% graduate students, so all the undergraduates kind of kept together. There were all these graduate students talking about the auteur theory and Godard and all this stuff, and we were talking about James Bond and Clint Eastwood movies. So we discovered right away that we had a certain affinity towards each other.
Well, it turned out that we both liked films that had, strong narrative stories and then had action in them. I mean, one of the films we found out that we both loved as kids was The Great Escape, and we had seen that film we each had it memorized.
He was the only person in my life I'd ever met who also owned the soundtrack album from the movie The Great Escape. He wanted to be a director, I wanted to be a writer, and we both wanted to just get out of school and start making movies. None of this work your way up stuff. We just wanted to get out there and start doing it.
We had a three-pronged attack plan. One was to write a feature film, because everyone said that's the way to crack into the business, and of course that turned out to be true. The second was to try and do a low-budget horror movie, which were very popular in those days.
And then the third one had to do with Bob hanging around Universal, having heard the legend of Steven Spielberg, and the legend goes that Steven hung around Universal and found a vacant office and made everybody think that he belonged there and was a director under contract and got a directing gig. It's not exactly like that, but it's a good story.
And I just hung around for the entire episode of a McCloud show, from beginning to end. And I saw them scrambling to write these scripts the weekend before it had to shoot, and so I suggested to Bob that maybe we could, write some of these, and we did. We wrote a episode of The Night Stalker. We sold that, and they produced that one.
Writing was a real good way to get in, because everybody needs a script, and paper's cheap. Film was expensive.
Well, these two fiends, these just maniacal kids, forced their way into my office. I think I was on the Goldwyn lot, and they said they were USC graduates. I thought they were imposters, and they forced their way up there. But they were so nuts that I had to keep them. I couldn't throw them out because they were just so completely crazed.
What's your name? Stanley Dwowski. Polish, eh? What a coincidence. Rudy Polanski, how are you? Hey, I like that watch, Stan. Great shoes. Love them. Thanks. So, Stan, you want to buy this Buick Centurion, huh? Good choice. Smart man. You got good taste. I'll tell you something. A lot of people have these days. Nice to see somebody finally walk on this lot who knows a good car when he sees one, I'll tell you. So, we read it up?
Yeah, well, actually, I was just looking.
Oh, hey, terrific. Terrific. That's what we're here for, Stan. Here you can look, browse, peek, touch, feel, taste, smell, do anything you want, take all the time you want. Nobody's going to pressure anybody around here, Stan.
Matter of fact, we sort of formed a group, the three of us, and our motto was Civitas Sine Prudentia, which means a citizenry without prudence. Means basically social irresponsibility. And under the heading of social irresponsibility, we would sit there and talk about, like people today talk about political correctness. We would talk about the socially irresponsible merits of a film.
Bob and I had cooked up this idea that it was a film that eventually became 1941, which was about the panic that set in on the home front here on the West Coast right in the days following Pearl Harbor. And then it turned out that John and Stephen over the years had become good friends, and Stephen remembered my student film from the early days of USC. And I, gave Stephen the screenplay, and he read it, and he said, God, I want to make this. So it was like one of those, it sounds easy, but that is exactly how it happened.
We wanted to call it in originally The Night the Japs Attacked, or just plain Japs. And of course that was, you know, politically incorrect. You can't call people Japs or anything like that, you know.
And I think that Stephen might be a bit uncomfortable with that really dark type of humor, and I think he softened it. And I think that's where maybe the material and he were a little bit out of sync.
Yeah, Stephen doesn't have the healthy cynicism that we have.
Just about every frame is filled with some sort of a mayhem of
pratfall, explosion, something.
I think it was Pauline Kael said it was like having your head stuck in a pinball machine for 2 hours. I thought that was a good description of what it might have been like, and I'm very proud. I put that on my resume.
Oh yeah, I'll tell you something.
Bob was over at my apartment one night, and we pulled out the first Beatles album. And on the back of it, they had this whole description of all the insanity of Beatlemania. We came to the idea, wouldn't it be neat to do a movie about kids waiting in line to see the Beatles? And that little phrase, kids waiting in line to see the Beatles, was actually how we pitched the script to Warner Brothers. And we remembered we'd met 2 female producers, Alex Rose and Tamara Sayev. We said, well, this is would be an irresistible package for female producers to have a movie about girls waiting, trying to get in to see the Beatles. And that's who we took it to, and they got the idea instantly.
He's cardboard.
It's one of the most intricate screenplays we ever wrote. And that's when we did a very interesting thing. We do cards, 3x5 cards. We actually color-coded the cards for each character so that when we laid out the story in our cards, we could see immediately and graphically how long we've been away from a particular character. So leaving characters at a point where it promised more story, and then picking them up where you understood where they have been was a very difficult thing to write when you do an ensemble film like that.
The movie was eventually made at Universal, and it was the first time in the history of Universal Studios that the legal department said, this is a movie that should not be made because the Beatles are depicted in it, and the Beatles have enough money to sue Universal, and what if they don't like this movie? They could sue us. Don't make this movie.
They actually said they have enough money to sue and win.
So we actually had to storyboard out the Beatles sequences to show to the legal department the scene with Nancy Allen under the bed with the Beatles' legs and so forth. We had always described the movie as sort of a cross between American Graffiti and Ben-Hur. Ben-Hur in that you never saw Jesus' face, and we were never going to show the Beatles' face.
Standing in them. Good idea.
I remember not really knowing a way to judge pacing. I would sit there and watch the actors doing the scene, and I would be terrified and distraught that it wasn't working. You know, it was flat, and then I would go to dailies and then be incredibly relieved because something happens when it all gets translated into 2 dimensions.
You know something else, Stan? I really think you ought to buy this Buick. Mm-hmm. I think you ought to buy it today, right now. You want to know why? Because this Buick is you. The color is you. Look at it. This is your car. Stanley Dworsky is Buick Centurion convertible. Now, I know what you're thinking, Stan. You're thinking...
I got more confident before when I went and did used cars, more confident with the camera, more confident with my ability to edit, more confident in being able to deal with the actors.
In this deal. Well, the prestige alone of owning a Buick Centurion convertible can't be measured in terms of dollars and cents, am I right?
The thing you never get comfortable with are all the external pressures that, you know, the studio exerts in different strange ways.
With I Want to Hold Your Hand in used cars, we had absolutely sensational sneak previews, and we had these guys who were experts from the studio telling us, oh, these movies are going to be gigantic, these are so great, these are going to do so well, and they didn't. And you know, you learn the lesson that nobody knows what they're talking about, nobody knows what they're doing. You know, we were 26, 27 years old when we made I Want to Hold Your Hand, and we thought, gee, that guy's the head of advertising. He must know what he's doing, and he didn't. He didn't have a clue.
And we would deliver the film, and then everyone in marketing and advertising would look at us and say, so what do you want us to do? We say, oh, so we have to do the advertising too, and we have to do the marketing. Oh, well, we didn't know. The movie comes out in 3 weeks. We'll work real hard now. So that's what we learned, is that unfortunately, you can't just be a filmmaker.
Even the most powerful filmmaker is desperately afraid of having a financial failure because the business is ruled by bean counters, you know, and by boring bean counters at that, you know, who are arrogant, young punks, you know, and there ought to be an enormous bloodletting, a night of the long knives, in which everyone with a suit is hanged.
After we had done Used Cars, Bob and I wrote Back to the Future, and a studio executive was given the script and it made the assumption that this was going to be a package with Steven, and responded extremely favorable to the screenplay. And then Bob and I came in and he had a meeting and we said, now here's what we're going to do, and we're talking about the screenplay we're going to do, and he's nodding enthusiastically, and then halfway through the meeting he said, and so now what's Steven's involvement going to be? And Bob and I said, well, he's not involved. And the guy went, oh. And the meeting was over, and that was the end of Back to the Future at that studio.
People in Hollywood, including people like Steven Spielberg, grasp that this guy's a real talent. But in Hollywood, the conflict always comes down to this. You can know somebody's really good, but if they keep making movies that people don't like, you then find it really hard to back them. I think the interesting case here might be to compare Zemeckis to someone like the Coen brothers, who also make movies that everyone can tell are really well made, but somehow don't connect to the audience. The interesting leap that Zemeckis made was to actually go from making movies that critics and other filmmakers could admire to making movies that connect with the mass audience, which is just about the hardest thing there is to do.
It was for 3 years that I didn't direct. And then I was finally offered Romancing the Stone from Michael Douglas, and the screenplay was pretty crippled in its early stage, but I immediately knew what had to be done to kind of fix it.
You got any valuables in that suitcase?
No. Yes. All my clothes and things.
You got an umbrella?
No.
You got a good pair of walking shoes?
They're all like these.
Uh-huh.
It had wonderful characters, and it had, and the story was there.
Okay, let's make some time.
But the ending didn't crystallize. Treasure films are, I think, very hard films to do because what starts the movie is greed, and that can't be rewarded at the end. So typically a treasure film has to end like Treasure of Sierra Madre. It has to sort of be tragic in a sense, and the treasure has to go back to nature or be blown in the wind or something. And so the dilemma was it's never satisfying for the characters to go on this trek and actually end up with the treasure. So I guess my main contribution to the screenplay was the sort of twist ending where you felt it ended like a typical treasure movie where the alligator got the stone.
Thank you.
And then in the bittersweet sense, Michael Douglas kisses the girl goodbye. And then the 80s ending was that after all these months, he actually hunted down the alligator and got the treasure back, and they all lived happily ever after.
It changed the perception of Bob Zemeckis as a director. It said, here's a director who can direct movies that don't have anything to do with Steven Spielberg's involvement. He can direct actors, he can tell a good story, and he can make money. And now every studio in town was ready for Bob Zemeckis to make a movie for them. And the movie that he most wanted to make, of course, was Back to the Future. And we took it back to the one guy who had always believed in it, Steven Spielberg. The studio executives that passed on it said that they liked the script, that they just didn't think that sweetness was something that was box office, or time travel was box office. So it wasn't that this script is terrible, it was this script is good, but it's not commercial.
The thing I'm the most proud of Back to the Future is the screenplay. That's my favorite screenplay that Bob and I wrote, and I feel it's the most intricate and most interesting, and it reminds me of a great old Billy Wilder type screenplay where everything is there, every single frame of film, every line of dialogue is advancing plot or character, and that's what I always loved, and that's what I had always hoped to do.
I happened upon my father's high school yearbook, and I was thumbing through it. My father went to the same high school that I did, and he was the president of his graduating class. I looked at this picture of this guy wearing this tie, and he's my father, and he looked like one of these political jerks that I went to school with, and I wondered to myself, gee, I wonder if I'd have gone to high school with my father, would I have been friends with him, or would I had nothing to do with him? When I came back out to L.A., I told the story to Bob, and Bob said, yeah, and wouldn't it be neat if you found out that your mother, who said she never did anything, she was in cars and parking and all this stuff.
When I was your age, I never chased a boy or called a boy or sat in a parked car with a boy.
We just got going on this idea of meeting your parents as a teenager and interrelating with them.
Yeah. Horrible nightmare. Dreamed that I went back in time. It was terrible.
Well, safe and sound now, back in good old 1955.
1955? You're my mom.
My name is Lorraine. Lorraine Bates?
Yeah. But you're so thin.
When all of these things are set up at the beginning, you're going, well, why are they telling me this story about this family that's kind of dysfunctional and they aren't getting along, and why am I seeing this stuff that is kind of uninteresting? And then suddenly, after an hour, things are starting to be paid off one by one by one, and the jokes get bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's what's exciting, when the audience can put together, oh, that's why it is. That's why they showed me this, and I'm figuring it out.
I've never seen purple underwear before, Calvin.
Calvin, why do you keep calling me Calvin?
Well, that is your name, isn't it? Calvin Klein? It's written all over your underwear.
The kid has to go back in time in a time machine. Where's this time machine going to come from? We don't want it to be the Department of Defense's time machine, because that opens up a whole bunch of stuff that we don't want to deal with.
We don't want it to be a dream.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a wish. It's not a genie that does it. It's got to be a time machine, and who would invent a time machine? And American folklore is full of the idea of the crackpot inventor in his garage, and it's Doc Brown.
Wait a minute, Doc. Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Kind of a DeLorean?
The way I see it, if you're going to build a time machine into a car, why not do it with some style? Besides, the stainless steel construction made the flux dispersal. Look out!
He's out there. He's crazy. He's nuts. He's wild. And so, by virtue of what it is that this character has to do to serve the story, the characterization came out of that. The same thing is true to a large extent with Marty McFly.
How do you take like a hip teen kid from the 80s and have him have a relationship with this character? And that was, we struggled with that until we came up with the idea of the amplifier, which actually, in that image of this giant loud amplifier, it's the one element that made it very easy in one image to understand why the two characters were together.
Marty appreciated Doc, and Doc appreciated, Doc saw value in having an amplifier
that could do this. For whatever reason, we don't know, but at least we understood then the connection and the sort of and the friendship between the two. Because as the film starts to go from the script to the physical stage, then things start to layer on, and then we'll find a prop or an idea will come out of the art department, and we'll use that and make that a part of their character.
In the first Back to the Future, when the costume designer showed Bob the guys in the gas station dressed in their perfect suits, he said, "I just got a great idea for a gag," and he thought of the gag to have the 4 guys come out and service the car and contrast it with the you serve yourself gas station of today.
See, I think that a movie like Back to the Future is a very, very character-driven film. I think the effects are quite, the original Back to the Future are really minimal. They're supporting the story. They're not what the movie's about at all. And what's wonderful is the ideas in Back to the Future.
We couldn't get a speck of publicity on this film to save our life. Everyone just considered it to be some silly teen high school movie, and when we tried to explain the story in a press blurb or something, it sounded like a movie that you didn't want to go see, and it was considered a film in trouble, and it was going to get killed in the summer against the sequels that were coming out, and these other high-profile films, and it just literally burst on the scene.
First time that we screened the movie, which is in Long Beach, California, and at the end when the car turns around and rockets off and Huey Lewis comes on at the end, well, the audience went up to the ceiling. I mean, I've never seen a preview like that, and at that moment we knew this is a huge movie, because that kind of response I'd only seen once before, and that was in E.T. That was but in another way, where everybody was crying at the end of the movie. But in this case, they came out of their seats at the end of the movie, and only then did we know that we had a big hit on our hands.
Mark, action.
The future. Here we had the perfect opportunity to do something that could never be done under any other circumstance, where you have a sequel, so you can be risky with it to a certain extent because it's a sequel. So the only point of doing a sequel is to try something different. And we had a sequel about time travel and time paradox. So the logical thing was, so let's do something that we will actually go back into the first film and see things from a completely different perspective. And that's illustrated the best in the film when Marty goes back and witnesses the moment that his father punched Biff at the high school, and he's there duplicated, and he's watching it from a whole different perspective, and all the most complicated Back to the Future time paradox themes are like wrapped up in that section of the film.
Talk about deja vu.
I think Back to the Future 2 may be the most successful formalist film ever made. The whole joke of it and all the wit of it is actually watching the juxtaposition of basically a sequel over the film that preceded it, which is actually a very self-referential kind of filmmaking, and really, if someone like Godard or some European heavy had done it, everyone would have thought how brilliant. But this was actually done basically in a mass market Hollywood film.
The studio didn't really give us a hard time. We weren't showing the early drafts to the studio anyway. That was one of the advantages of writing a sequel to one of the most successful movies of all time. When anybody ever asked a question, we could arrogantly say, "Are you going to tell us that you know more about making a Back to the Future movie than we do?" And they say, no, you guys know what you're doing with Back to the Future. So there was a level of pressure that wasn't there in the development process.
Well, that's why we were always tied to the trilogy, because we knew in our hearts that the third installment was going to be the one where we were liberated. But we needed an entire movie to get rid of the clutter and get us back into the track in the same tone and vein as the first one. Well, I always felt it was the only way we would ever get a chance now to do in the world to do a Western, because the genre seems to not have much life in it, if any life at all. And and it was great.
It'd be fun to do this. I mean, we just said, well, let's go back to the very beginning of Hill Valley. Hill Valley is a character in the stories, just as the human characters are. So let's see the beginning of the clock tower. Let's see all this kind of stuff. And it just gave us a chance to go wild with these great Western archetypes.
What's your name, dude?
Martin. Eastwood. Clint Eastwood.
What kind of stupid name is that?
Our perception of the West is only through Western movies because there's nothing to record it, actually. So I think there's a part of every film director, I really believe this, who wishes he could do a Western. And I think it's interesting to watch because a lot of films that filmmakers make are actually Westerns. You know, Star Wars is a Western, in my opinion. Just takes place in space.
Come on, run! You can dance better than that!
Shit.
I try very hard not to react to what I had just done when I choose another project. I don't see the point in that because you then shut the door on what might be a wonderful, really wonderful movie just because it had a special effect in it. And so you said, I'm not going to do that, or I'm not going to do a comedy. The thing that attracted me to Roger Rabbit initially was the very first scene in the very first screenplay. And I felt that when I read the first, I guess it was 5 pages, because the first 2 sort of just described the cartoon, and then when the cartoon character stepped out, it just, for me, was just a brilliant idea in suspending the disbelief of being able to create a world where you could mix animation and live action. It was just crystallized in that first scene.
This Roger, I think he was blowing his line.
I felt that the movie could go anywhere from there, and the idea of mixing these genres of film noir and animation was just so outrageous that I felt that it had to be done.
Crying out loud, Roger! How many times do we have to do this damn scene? No! I'll be in my trailer, taking a nap! Excuse me, Toots.
We were faced with so many technical difficulties on Roger that he would have to create on the moment maybe a new scene to deal with something that we couldn't do physically because it couldn't be animated or there wasn't a way to do it with a special effect or some physical effect. And he would have to design the scene to go in another way in order to make it work. And his story-making sense and his ability to write dialogue helped him be flexible in that way and, you know, sometimes created even better scenes, I think.
We had this shot where this stork is riding, Eddie Valiant's coming down, this stork rides a bicycle through the shot. The bicycle is real, the stork is going to be animated. And the bicycle, we could never get it to go through the shot and stay upright. It always fell over out of shot, and there was no way, because it was a pan round, to not see this fallen bike on the ground. In the end, Bob, of course, said, all right, well, what we do is we see the stork go through the shot, we hear this crash, and when we pan around, there's the stork all over the ground with letters flying everywhere, and that's what you see in the movie. It was not scripted, it's just because we could not get the bike to go through the shot and stay upright.
2 things were that happened after I came on board in the screenplay that made the movie arc, I think, to a different place. Was Jeff and Peter came up with the idea of Judge Doom. Everyone knows you can't kill a cartoon character. So the invention of this diabolical character, Judge Doom, and this dip that would erase cartoon characters was able to finally let us create a story that had a dramatic structure because there was real jeopardy, hence conflict, and all the other stuff that falls into place.
That's right, my dear! Enough to dip Toontown off the face of the earth! Vehicle of my own design. 5,000 gallons of heated dip pumped at enormous velocity through a
That was the first breakthrough idea, and the second was another outrageous idea of the reason the judge was doing all this was to create the Los Angeles freeway system, and that just fit in perfectly. I love that idea.
Soon, where Toontown once stood will be a string of gas stations, inexpensive motels, restaurants that serve rapidly prepared food, tire salons, automobile dealerships, and wonderful, wonderful billboards reaching as far as the eye can see. My God, it'll be beautiful.
There was a lot of suffering in making Roger, and that was because every single shot was so technical from every aspect. And the hardest part of doing any special effect, and what I consider my job to be, is to keep reminding the cast that they're not props, and that, you know, and to keep them from getting bogged down and crushed by this giant technical sort of space that they have to perform in.
I never, in a weird way, thought of Roger Rabbit as an effects movie, which is an insane thing to say, but I got so used to just the cartoons being in the scenes that I thought it was just a story about this rabbit and this guy. And then, you know, he knows these guys and they know these guys, and this is what happens. And although it was a phenomenal effects picture, and it's the same with Death Becomes Her. Death Becomes Her is a movie with a lot of new and really never seen before special effects.
I will not speak to you till you put your head on straight.
But at the same time, I don't consider it an effects movie.
Universal bought the script. We did a couple of drafts with them, and they said we'd like to make this. And Bob has obviously worked with them a lot in the past, and they said, would you like to direct it? And he said, sure. A pretty uncomplicated story.
Yeah, that was I was in the set of another movie. I was shooting another movie, and David called me and said, guess what? Bob Zemeckis is interested in doing a picture, who was a quirky little comedy. And I thought, Back to the Future, Roger Rabbit, Bob Zemeckis? Are you sure? Did you get it right? And we had a meeting with him the following week. It changed my life, and my perceptions, and I understand how I come from Europe. I lived in Europe all my life. How wrong the misperception we have of the studio system, Hollywood, of people, how the people work here.
It seems that films with special effects and sort of elaborate style tend to always be about some kid who's got to go on an adventure, or like an Indiana Jones type of film, which are great. But this one had those elements, and it had this incredibly dark theme. I thought, what a wonderful idea to try and blend these elements. Now, I don't know if it's going to work or not, but that was the thing that inspired me about the film.
Basically, it's about two women who've known each other for a very long time and have been jealous of each other for a very long time, and will do almost anything to make the other one look bad. What it's really about is vanity and pride and the obsession with one's appearance that seems particularly prevalent here in Los Angeles. But the thing that drives it is the feud between these two women.
Mad Hill! I don't believe it.
Well, how are you?
So long.
I know.
Don't you dare say how long.
Matt, I'd like you to meet Dr. Ernest Menville, my fiance.
You were just wonderful.
Ernest
Menville? Dr. Ernest Menville's a plastic surgeon?
You were so terrific.
Well, Ernest is quite a fan.
Well,
I've read all about
dance
you.
number, boy, oh boy, that.
I can't believe I'm meeting you. He never told me he had such a Madeline Ashton thing.
Well, we're both huge fans.
I'm sure he doesn't have a thing. Do you?
The knee-jerk reaction to anyone, if you said, how would you like to live forever? Everyone goes, well, of course. And no one ever really thinks of the consequences if they were ever actually granted that wish. And it's kind of like an old Twilight Zone episode, kind of a dark fables that dealt with black magic, science fiction, that sort of thing. And it asked that question, you know, what would happen if you actually did live forever?
That's what it does. It stops the aging process dead in its tracks and forces it into retreat. Drink that potion, and you'll never grow even 1 day older. Don't drink it, and continue to watch yourself rot.
How much is it?
What I wanted to do in the film is just start with casting everybody against type, just to immediately create the feel and the tone of it not being conventional. So you've got Bruce playing this incredibly weak character, which is against what he typically does. You have Goldie playing a neurotic murderess, which is so different than what she usually does. And you've got Meryl, you know, with her head on backwards. And, you know, you're used to seeing her in these incredibly serious, important films, and here she is with her head stretching and on backwards. And I thought that was just a great way to, you know, showcase the film.
Have you called the police?
No, I called you first thing.
So what had happened here is that Ernest, in a rage, attempted to murder Meryl by pushing her down the stairs, and she had taken the potion, so she is severely injured and twisted around, but she's alive. What we really wanted to do here is actually have her head put on backwards, and I mean, we were able to pull that off using computer graphics. The thing about this illusion is Meryl's ability to do this, where she first had to do the scene with a hood over her head, acting from the neck down, and then about 6 weeks later, do all the acting from the neck up.
What about the time of death? Do you think they could ever use it to prove the phone call came after?
No, it's very difficult to determine time of death within a few hours. It's not really an exact science.
Ernest.
It's not an exact...
Ernest! Ernest! You pushed me down the stairs.
This is Meryl Streep. And at this point, what she has is a slight problem because her head is on backwards. As you can see, if I turn it sideways, maybe, give you a better idea. This was a sculpture done by Kevin Haney, who did the makeups on the show. And this bust was created to give to us to scan into the computer using lasers, which basically read the outside of this sculpture here, 360 degrees this way, every possible little speck on here. That information is digitized and put into the computer.
The laser shines a straight line down one side, and then a camera at an angle reads the profile of the edge. So if I have a light coming on my face over here, and you shoot it over here, you can see the contour of the line, and then you just rotate the model all the way around, and you get different contour lines. Then this is translated into a computer model like this one right here.
But once you get the lines in, then you can manipulate you actually animate it the way you want to, right? Once you burn it in, you can move it with the computer in any direction at any speed, actually creating human movement and human skin texture, which is what's, you know, so breakthrough in this, because that neck section of Meryl Streep is the first time that flesh has been manipulated and digitized on a motion picture film. That's where the artistry comes in. These computer graphics artists are artists because, in a sense, that they're animators who work with digital information rather than with pencils, and they have to understand human movement and lighting and all these different things, and that's where it's not just somebody who's knows how to run a computer can do it. You have to have a certain amount of artistic ability to be able to really make it work.
You're in the house now, pal.
Well, it's supposed to be funny in the sense of her predicament, but it's also supposed to be sort of mesmerizing and hypnotic is what I was trying to do, and also be funny at the same time.
My ass. I can see my ass.
I designed a lot of scenes that would happen in basically one shot, so it meant a lot of elaborate camera movement and that sort of thing, and I'm very proud of that because I really learned something, which is that when you have got writing that is so good and you've got actors that are so good, that to impose editing by just the virtue of how you would set up a scene, like say if you set it up to be over the shoulders, you would have to edit to do the scene, and so then you're imposing an element that doesn't necessarily have to be there. So I wanted to design shots that wouldn't have to be edited if they didn't need to be. So in this scene here with Madeline going into Chagall's, it's a Rodeo Drive salon that on the top level looks very normal and sort of Beverly Hills gaudy, and then the idea was that you go downstairs and we just keep putting on levels of strangeness. I mean, she walks with a guard. Then there's this guy getting his blood transfusion in this terrible bed that goes around. And we want to just keep layering strangeness onto it. And then this is something I thought of when I read the script again the very first time. I did this in one shot that's 360 degrees, and you see the entire room in this shot. They're obviously in the room by themselves, but then you'll see toward the end of the scene, on the same sofa where we picked up Madeline, Chagall just mysteriously appears.
Makeup is pointless. It does nothing anymore. Are you listening to me? Do you even care? You just stand there with your 22-year-old skin and your tits like rocks and laughing.
This is something that might be too hard for in the first viewing for the audience to grasp, because the scene is so loud and there's so much, and the room is cluttered with this equipment and stuff, so you might believe there might be another door there. But so that was part of my idea of trying to make this a very strange and mysterious place.
You know what I mean? How about that? Money is no object. It means nothing to me. Oh, Mr. Chagall. I'm sorry, Mr. Chagall. I'm really, really sorry.
Anna, don't talk. Just go away.
A great idea for a movie is still the rarest commodity. So anybody can write their way into the film business. What I like to do in films is make them dense and complicated, and hopefully not so dense and so complicated, so that they can work on a broad level. But then if someone has got a love and an ability to see sort of film subtlety, then there's something in them something for them that they can enjoy as well.